Thank you, everybody. And today, religion and sustainable development, emerging challenges and opportunities ahead of the 2024 G20 Summit in Brazil will start now. I'm a MC of today. My name is Naoto Yoshikawa. I'm a faculty member of the Tokai University. Thank you very much, everybody, coming here. First of all, just so I receive, this is a very Japanese tradition. Congratulations also the telex and from the parliament members Yanagimoto Akira. Relevant Miyake invited to today, but unfortunately he could not come to this conference, and just congratulating for success for this conference. Okay. Good afternoon. As a Vice Chancellor of the Tokai University and a proud member of the Tokai University Research Institute for Environment and Sustainability, we call TRICE, I am pleased to welcome you to the Religion and Sustainable Development Colloquium today. I extend warm greeting to our distinguished guest, Honorable Yukihisa Fujita, a member of the Parliament, Mr. David Bowis, UK Prime Minister's Special Envoy for International Freedom of Religion or Belief, Professor Cole Durham, Chair of the Interfaith Forum G20 at Brigham Young University, Professor Michael Young, previous president of the Texas A&M University, Professor Peter Petkov, Director of the Law at the University of Oxford, and so many other also the guests. I extend my heartfelt welcome to all our esteemed speakers and guests, colleagues, and friends. The focal point of today's conference revolves around the critical theme of the religion and sustainable development. This subject has been under discussion for some time, yet there seems to be a prevailing inclination to circumvent direct engagement of the religion in national policies and its impact on the societal structure. In light of this, even the positive influence of the religion on the social development faces significant challenges. Amid the current landscape, where the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, take center stage, however, the World Bank Global Economic Perspective for 2024, which was published 2 weeks ago, project economic stagnations, rising concerns about its widespread repercussion on society. In this context, it is imperative to urgently reassess the intricate relationship between the religions and society, exploring how religion can contribute to the social and individual development without direct involvement in the government affairs. On this condition, allow me to introduce the vision of Dr. Shigeyoshi Matsumae, the founder of the Tokai University, who sought to harness the passion of the religious belief for social development and global peace. Dr. Matsumae drew inspiration from the Nikolai Grundtvigs post-war effort, war meaning the second Schleswig War, the other war called the Dano-Persian War in 1864, emphasizing practical education over the spiritualism to rebuild developed Danish society. He also admired Enrico Dalgas, who created new fertile lands instead of reclaiming those lost in the war. At this moment, also the Denmark's agriculture development based on these lands. Establishing Tokai University, Dr. Matsumae translated these ideas into action, guided by the Old Testament book of the Ecclesiastes, chapter 11.1, cast your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will find it again. This philosophy drove him to invest in the nurturing human resources who contribute to the improving a society and fostering a peace in Japan and the world, which is today's Tokai University. This conference represents collaborative effort between the Tokai University Research Institute for Environment and Sustainability, G20 Interface Forum, Regent Park College at the University of Oxford, Oxford Journal of the Law and Religion, International Center for the Study of Law and Religion at the Brigham University, and the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation. I sincerely thank all these institutions for enabling today's gathering, bringing together distinguished scholars to deliberate on tangible approaches to sustainable development and realization of an inclusive society. As we embark on discussion today, I'm confident that this conference will deepen participants' and audiences' understanding of the intricate relationship between the religion and sustainable development. Furthermore, insight shared here will serve as critical input for Brazil's upcoming 2024 G20 Summit. Thank you. Peter, please come.
Well, this is a chance to say how grateful and excited we are to be here today, because Tokai University has always been a source of adventure and inspiration for many of us in a number of ways. My key few comments at the beginning of this conference will try to set the context and the connection and why the connection with Tokai is so important for us. And since this is an event which is dedicated to bringing religious voices in shaping policy relating to sustainable development in the context of the G20 summits and beyond, we seek inspiration from being here because of the very significant importance of this institution for our work, for Japan, and for the world. Tokai and its mission has always been associated with a vision for the building of bridges between culture and different cultures. And this vision was very much embedded in the intellectual intuitions of its founder, Matsumae Sensei. We, as a group of scholars, policymakers, and faith leaders who seek innovative solutions in finding out what difference would religious voices make in the achieving of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals agendas, always seek new visions, new intuitions, new trajectories through which this could happen. We have always been very committed to seeing this process as an intellectual endeavor which views central sustainable development goals as anchors which contextualize all other sustainable development goals as interdependent ecosystems and facilitate integrated policy formation which sees the SDGs through their interdependence as a complex cosmos and reject the notions that sustainable development trade-offs are possible. Our group actively pursues a committed position that a concern for the environment, for example, is integrated with concerns such as human rights, inclusive society, peace, justice, and democratic institutions, as well as concerned about interconnected world. And these are ecosystems which do not exist in isolation, but they're interconnected and interdependent. This commitment makes this event very special to us because it is hosted by a university dedicated and created for many of those commitments. This was a vision received by the founder of Tokai, Matsumaya Sensei, and it was the vision embedded in the ethos of Tokai University, which was created to build bridges between cultures through science, innovation, humanities, social sciences, and sport. And each of those units were equally important for the fulfillment of that vision. As a result of that, one of the most significant influences of the founder of Tokai could be seen in his commitment to sports and bringing sports as a vehicle for peace, as an agent for change. In the Bosei Judo Dojo, in the home of the founder of Tokai University, Matsumaya Sensei, there is a kanji text on the wall of a gym dedicated for judo practice. This is a calligraphy which says perseverance, character, and hope. It is a text which Matsumaya Sensei borrowed from St. Paul's epistle to the Romans. Suffering produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Matsumaya Sensei, the founder of Tokai University, and the third and perhaps the most visionary president of the International Judo Federation, is the man who shaped with his vision what is to become a modern understanding of education and modern understanding of what an educational institution has to do in order to transform the world. In order to understand the legacy of Matsumaya, and more importantly, the reason we're all here today, we need to consider Matsumaya's key spiritual and intellectual roots, which shaped his own formation and the ethos of Tokai University and all other endeavors he pursued through his vision, through politics, innovation and engineering, and as well peacemaking initiatives, as well as initiatives in sports. While Matsumaya was Japanese at his core in more than one way, he was deeply influenced by a man who lived very far from Japan, but not so far in the minds of many Japanese. He was Nikolai Grundtvig, a Danish Lutheran pastor, a Christian theologian, and an educational pioneer who lived in the 18th and the 19th century and shaped profoundly Denmark's ideas about education, about hymns, and about folk high schools, which still exist today, dedicated not to degrees, but to the opening up of young people's vision for the world. His educational ideas radicalized Danes' perceptions of themselves and their connection with the world. In his works, Grundtvig spoke about building of bridges between culture, where all cultures, developed and developing, developed and indigenous, would meet as equals in their ability to receive each other's gifts. Matsuamae embraced Grundtvig's ideas and incorporated them into the blueprint of Tokai as an educational foundation dedicated to the building of such bridges between culture. Matsuamae was a great innovator, a great statesman, a peacemaker whose vision for education was shaped by his experiences from developing of cutting-edge engineering innovations, through his experiences as a regular foot soldier during the Second World War, and subsequently through the fact that through his fact-finding mission to determine the actual aftermath of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and through the shaping of the post-World War II Japan and its relations with the world. His commitment to education linked with peace, justice, and democracy integrated sports with science in the core mission of Tokyo and Tokai to change the world, and even his failed missions such as trying to build a baseball stadium in the USSR in order to enter the Cold War only highlight his commitment to development and bringing soft power and unconventional solution in the transformation of societies. Among the number of foundational and symbolic pillars of Tokai's mission and Matsuamae's visions is their commitment to education and cultural and transformational imaginations. This is a continuity of what Matsuamae and his spiritual inspirations such as Uchimura Sensei saw in terms of developing a society which is bringing the ethical framework of Japan, which no longer exists, and its traditional ethical codes linked with Christianity, and a vision that one would make the other more universal. It will develop its voice in a more universal setting and in more universal context. Bringing together Bushido and Christianity in Matsuamae's vision and in the vision of his predecessor meant that you could think locally and act globally, and identify the unique voice of Japan for the world and make it an agent for change. As we're here today, we partake in Matsuamae Sensei's vision for a better world of unity and diversity. And in a magical way, we're connecting through an invisible thread with the past and the contemporary visions of Tokai and their orientation for the future. For us, this is a wonderful opportunity to get together and pay tribute to the founder of Tokai and to one of Tokai's most recent apostles, our dear friend, Professor Naoto Yoshikawa, whose work on ethics and economics and whose friendship and cooperation since the last G20 Summit in Japan has been a great source of inspiration for many of us. This event, as many of our mini G20 events in preparation for our main G20 event in Brazil this year, are an opportunity to cut our intellectual teeth, our perspectives on emerging trends on religion and development, and to create and elaborate new insights and test untested trajectories. In this respect, we have always valued greatly the intuitions of our Japanese colleagues who have helped us to think things well through unknown, unusual, and uncharted territories in a new way, which always helps us to renew our normative intuitions. One of the difficulties of this event is that we have an enormous task before us, which is becoming increasingly challenging. What are to do with the G20 process, from which commitments to sustainable development have virtually disappeared and have been replaced with a geopolitical trade-offs agenda. Sadly, now the agenda is no longer how to achieve the United Nations SDGs, but how to bring sustainable development back on the agenda. And in this respect, our work is becoming important, challenging, but also an opportune work. IF20, in a way, offers solutions outside of the box and uninhibited strategies to create new policy spaces and to challenge existing ones. At a time when the G20 process has lost its edge and the commitment to UN Sustainable Development Goals, and those agendas have been hijacked from anything from the war in Ukraine to the Gaza war, and by new geopolitical configurations, the work of IF20 is an effort to bring transformational religious voices in the context of sustainable development agenda through policy formation and through development of ideas and through engagement with difficult and uncomfortable questions. Questions not many stakeholders are prepared to engage with. Bringing back sustainable development on the agenda and empowering faith actors to do so in a credible way behind the scenes, as well as at center stage, has become more important than ever before. But the means to do so are not so obvious. This is why we need institutions like Tokai. This is why we need countries like Japan and our Japanese brothers in arms to help us think outside of the box, to help us find new ways and new trajectory to do that. More than ever before, religious voices matter, and they do need to bear their uncompromising witness that sustainable development is not optional and cannot be a trade-off for geopolitical solution. We need unconventional solutions, fresh ideas, and fresh approaches which push boundaries and transform perceptions in the same way the founder of this institution once did in the past. And by reclaiming the spaces, the intuitions, and the wisdom of figures like Matsumae Sensei would hopefully help us to do the same in this place, at this time, and for the future. Thank you.
So my name is Cole Durham. I'm moderating our first panel session, and I would like to invite the panelists for this session to join me up here. So that's Nobuyuki Asai, Matius Ho, and Jonathan Luckhurst. And I think, watch where your names are. This is planned for various computer needs that we will run into. I think I'm just going to sit down. These tables are more mobile than I thought. So let me just pick up on what Peter has just said as sort of framing what we're trying and hoping to do here. I think I need to say just a few words about the G20 initiative in general, and then we'll focus on the themes here. These sessions are being interpreted into Japanese and English. If any of you need that. This is also being taped so that these sessions will be available for a larger audience later on. But just a few words about the G20. The G20 brings together the 19 largest economies on Earth, plus the EU, plus, since last year, the African Union. So it's really larger than 20 countries. Historically, the G20 has had a major focus on economics. It really came into its own after the 2008 crash, and so much of its work focuses on economics. But as the G20 moves from country to country with different host countries each year, the host countries have the right to enunciate their priorities for the year, and they generally add focuses that deal with the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. These, of course, as many of you would be familiar with, include things like eliminating poverty, reducing hunger, increasing the quality of health care, education, women's rights, environmental issues, good governance, building partnerships. I haven't listed in detail all 17 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Most of you would be aware that because of COVID, the pathway toward achieving these goals is dropped significantly behind. But these other topics are topics that have historically been of great concern to religion, concerns that are older than nation states, actually, and concerns that are ongoing and vibrant. So one of the things we have learned as the Interfaith 20, the IF20, we aspire to be analogous to some of the other engagement groups like the Business 20, the B20, the C20 for civil society, the L20 for labor, the T20 for think tanks, the U20 for urban affairs. I'm not going to name all the other engagement groups, but religious voices are really distinctive in the sense that they often stretch from the sort of the peaks, the summits, the international summits, international levels, down to the grassroots. And they often have a wealth of experience that deals with advancing the Sustainable Development Goals and other major concerns of societies. And so we have taken upon ourselves to try and bring religious voices together, to find ways that they can speak to the agendas that are global in nature, that they can draw on the wisdom and talents and experience of religious communities, and find ways to help that fit into priorities that make sense to policymakers at the global level. So now in this session, we're going to focus on certain examples from different areas that look at social and economic issues, social stability. You will see that these take on very practical initiatives. But what I will do is just introduce our speakers first. They will each have about 10 minutes to present their views. We'll have a little more time because one of the original planned speakers had a death in the family and was not able to come. But let me just say a word of introduction first about our speakers. We will hear first from Nobuyuki Asai, who is at Soka Gakkai International. He's the director of the Office for Peace and Global Issues. He has much experience in religion and development, and will address us first. He will be followed by Matius Ho, who is the executive director of the Lemina Institute in Indonesia. He has spearheaded a very important project on cross-cultural religious literacy, which from my perspective is important not only at the grassroots level with training teachers, but is really a key to working across religious traditions in the G20 kind of context. And then we'll hear from Jonathan Luckhurst. He's a professor at the Graduate School of International Peace Studies at Soka University, and he's been named as a co-director of a new global governance center that will be formally launched in 2 or 3 months. But he's someone who brings great knowledge and experience working with the G7 and the G20 processes, and so we're grateful to have each of them. I'll just turn the time over to speakers in that order. It's a little, and go from there. So, Professor Asai.
Yeah, thank you, Cole, for introducing myself, and also thank you all the organizers for hosting this important event. I'm Nobuyuki Asai from Soka Gakkai International. I'm working in the office for peace and global issues, and I'm mainly covering issues including sustainable development or climate crisis or humanitarian affairs. So in terms of Soka Gakkai or SGI, I guess many of the Japanese people are aware of our organization. But firstly, I'd like to mention the background of our organization in terms of the Buddhist lineage. So as you may know, there are mainly 2 schools of Buddhism. One is Theravada and the other is Mahayana, and we belong to the Mahayana tradition. But I guess particularly for Western people, Theravada would look like more authentic Buddhist. I sometimes go to foreign countries and I say that I'm a Buddhist, but I always wear like this. So, are you really a Buddhist? But Mahayana people are like myself. So of course there are several priests or monks even within Mahayana Buddhists, but at the same time there are many lay people or ordinary people who practice Mahayana Buddhism. And also in Japan, in terms of Mahayana Buddhism, there are 2 types of Buddhist organizations. So one is traditional, schools. So many of them belong to the temples, and the key figures are Buddhist monks. And the other is contemporary organizations, including ourselves. So we sometimes collaborate with monks, but mainly they are lay people. So we ourselves, used to collaborate with some monks and made a huge donation to monks, but to be honest, they became corrupt. So we became independent now. And SGI, the Buddhist origin is Lotus Sutra. There are many sutras even within the Mahayana tradition, but we believe in the Lotus Sutra. And also in 13th century, there was a Buddhist monk called Nichiren. So he created his own religious teachings based on Lotus Sutra. So we are practicing his Buddhism. And even in 30th century, he wrote one good phrase. Even if it seems that because I was born in the ruler's domain, I follow him in my actions, but I will never follow him in my heart. So it is kind of represents the concept of human rights. Of course, it was in the 13th century, so he was not aware of the concept of human rights. But he was really familiar with that concept and made this declaration. So in the contemporary world, UNESCO previously chose this phrase as one of the good quotes for promoting human rights. And also now we are going to talk about the SDGs or sustainable development. And in terms of the SDGs, our former president, Daisaku Ikeda, who passed away just a couple of months ago, was really keen on SDGs. So, oh, slides. Okay, so maybe two pages. Yeah, thank you. So the left side is his proposal in 2012. And it was, before SDGs was launched, but he also proposed or mentioned the importance of existence of such global goals. And the right half is his proposal in 2016. And he talked about SDGs from the Buddhist perspective. And also, I'd like to mention one thing that, the former president, Daisaku Ikeda, was a very close friend with Tokai University founder, Dr. Matsumae. So both had the experience of promoting exchange between Japan and the Soviet Union. So they had a lot of talk about how to promote friendship between these two countries. Okay, next, please. And also, in our tradition, there are some other key concepts for in terms of SDGs. So, it is Buddhism, so interdependence. And also, we are putting emphasis on human revolution. It might be slightly different from the other Buddhist groups, but we are putting emphasis on this. So, the second part. So, human revolution is the most fundamental of all revolutions, and the most necessary revolution for humankind. So that is one of the key concepts for ourselves. Oh, next, please. And nowadays, we promote various activities directly relevant to the SDGs goals. But I feel the most important is about goal 4, quality education. So we promote non-formal education through exhibitions, videos, and fora. And also we have we promote environmental education in Manaus, Brazil. And also we promote music education project in Jordan. And also, for other goals, we promote different activities as well. So this is done by Soka Gakkai National Organization and also by SGI. It's an international NGO. And in addition, I failed to write on this page, but we have some affiliates that promote peace, culture, and education. And they also making efforts for achieving SDGs as well. In the education part, Soka University is one of our big affiliates, and Johnson happens to be from that university. Next, please. So our main tool is a panel exhibition, and it is being used in many countries. And we are not trying to give just knowledge to the audience, but we are putting emphasis on promoting dialogue among audience. And also, as it is mentioned here, in some countries, youth and children serve as voluntary guides at the venues. So through such dialogue, we really feel that people can deepen understanding about the sustainability issue, and they can reflect their own way of life, and it leads to the change of behavior of each person. So we are really putting emphasis on this aspect. Next, please. And this is the right side is this website of our center in Brazil. And as you may know, now the rainforest in Amazon is now being decreasing, and that's a really important issue. But I hear that for local people, development, just kind of economic development is always respected or what they want. So they are not feeling the importance of the rainforest. So now we are sharing the information that rainforest makes a really, really big difference for the world. And and through such education or information, we are promoting the preservation of the rainforest. Next, please. And also, in our organization, youth members are always sitting at the forefront for the activity, and just in March, they will co-organize a big event in collaboration with other youth organizations. Next, please. And these are the examples of other national organizations. Left is from Italy and right is from India. So each organization is promoting their own initiative as well. Next, please. Oh, and next, please. And also, I found that the title of this section contains the phrase of social stability. So when we look back the current situation in Japan, we have a lot of vulnerable people, like older persons or women or children and so on. And in particular, I guess the aging is a really, really big issue now in Japan. So yeah, it's like more than half of over 70s in Japan face the risk of isolation. So when we think about the social stability, we have to take that into our consideration. Next, please. And we are, on a daily basis, we are making efforts in order to make a difference for the community building in each local community. So many members voluntarily join local community association or local voluntary fire company and so on in order to contribute to the community building and so on. And next, please. Yeah, the importance of such activity was proved when a big disaster happened. So these are from Tohoku, and these are only the organizational activity, but in addition to them, individual members, many members voluntarily conducted a lot of relief activity or joined the running of public shelters and so on. So we promote social activity on a daily basis, motivated by religious concept. And then it made a big difference when emergency happens. We really feel so. So now this aspect is really important for achieving SDGs or in order to create a very stable society. But it is often difficult to assess this aspect. So only the assessing the effect of organizational activity is more easier, but for assessing this type of individual members' contribution is difficult. And I guess it applies to other religions as well. I guess religion makes a lot of difference for society and for achieving SDGs as well. But it is sometimes difficult to assess the impact or effect that religious groups are making for the society. So now it is our new task, and now we are addressing that. Yeah. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Durham. And first of all, I want to thank the Tokai University G20 Interfaith Forum and all the organizers for inviting me to participate in this important panel. And even though I've transited through the Japanese airports for many times, but this is my first time to actually visit Japan. So thank you very much, and this has been a very wonderful experience, meeting with wonderful people and wonderful country. So thank you very much. I'm Matius Ho. I'm the Executive Director of Lemena Institute in Indonesia. I've been asked to share about the experience of our program on training for teachers in Indonesia that we call cross-cultural religious literacy. I'm really thankful for Professor Petkov as well, because in his earlier remarks, he drew my attention to the important philosophy of the foundation of Tokai University, where it's not only establishing a university, but the founders also see how to contribute to the world peace through Tokai University. So in a way, what we try to do through this program in Indonesia on cross-cultural religious literacy is that how we can contribute to peace through education, especially in a context where religious diversity is a very strong feature of the society. And I think even though I think Indonesia maybe is a rather unique case because it's very diverse, but with all the global mobility, immigration, and refugee, I think people are also now everywhere are also facing with more how to deal with increasing diversity in the society. So in the 2 or 3 years ago, UNESCO released a report on the futures of education, where it says that one of the important growing issue in the world that the education needs to pay attention is how the world appears increasingly divided and polarized. We've seen it everywhere, and also, of course, in Indonesia. And then that's why it says that reimagining the future together calls for pedagogies that foster cooperation and solidarity. So in a way, that's what we try to do through this program, is how we can contribute to the pedagogies that can strengthen cooperation, solidarity, and social cohesion in Indonesia. And why is that? Let me give a quick context of Indonesia. We have 270 million people, and I think it's one of the most diverse countries in the world as well, with more than 1,000 ethnicities, more than 600 languages, and of course the world's largest Muslim population in the world in one country, because 87% are Muslims. So it's actually more than all Muslims in the Middle East countries, I mean, minus the North Africa if you combine. We have about 10% of Christians and smaller proportions of Hindu, Buddhist, Confucianist, and other beliefs as well. And we are spread in a very wide geography like this. But Indonesia, even though Muslims are the majority, we don't have any state religion. So there is no official state religion. It's not a religious state. It's a unitary state, not a federal. So we had our independence in 1945, but it was one of the monumental events was actually 17 years before the independence. It was in 1928 when the youth leaders declared that there were one nation, Indonesia, and with one motherland. So that really we celebrate that as the birth of the idea of Indonesia as one nation, even though we are very diverse. And the state ideology also protects is a consensus of our agreement to be one nation and based on one state ideology that we call Pancasila, or the 5 principles. And the national motto also reflects the importance of unity in diversity. But that's why the diversity in a society like this is very fragile, because the last few years of survey, for example, shows the influence of the intolerant and even extremist teachings in Indonesia. For example, there was a very shocking survey in 2017 among Islamic religious teachers, lecturers, and students that show an increasing opinion and ideas of extremism. For example, 37% of the respondents agree that jihad is actually a war, even though many ulamas, the Muslim ulama, are telling the followers that jihad is not necessarily a war, but also maybe a fight against corruption and other bad behavior. But many people simply understand it as a war and primarily aim to fight non-Muslims. The following year, in 2018, there was also a national survey done among the Muslim teachers that also show a very high, more than 50% of them have intolerant opinion, and even higher among the madrasah teachers. So madrasah in Indonesia, they follow the national curriculum, but they have more religious courses on Islam. I think that's why the recommendation of the national survey says that there needs to be an introduction more of the religious literacy and also interfaith education. So the UNESCO Guide for Intercultural Education says that in contrast to just a religious education, interfaith education is actively aiming to shape the relation between people of different religions. So that's the focus. And then also the need to introduce other religions because the survey was done among the teachers and lecturers of Islamic religious education, the recommendation was to introduce other religions in Islamic religious education. Even though as a Christian, I would say that also to introduce other religions in Christian religious education and even in other religious education. And then not only about that, but there is a need to expose the teachers to positive experience of diversity, because the teachers need to have a positive experience that being in contact with people of other faiths are not endangering or harmful to your faith, but it's okay. It's because we are the same people. So we developed this based on a concept of cross-cultural religious literacy that is quite simple, actually. It's based on 3 competencies. The cross-cultural religious literacy is basically saying that in a religiously diverse society, we need to develop certain competencies so that we not only live together peacefully, but we can collaborate. Because peaceful coexistence only is not enough. We need to be able to develop peaceful collaboration. So that's why interfaith dialogue is good, but we need to go beyond interfaith dialogue, because trust in the society will be established when we can work together, not just to have a nice dialogue. So the personal competency, for example, is saying that we need to build our understanding about our own religion well, because many of the extremists or the terrorists, they don't actually have a good understanding of their religion. But that's not enough. We need to also understand the religion of other people, but from the perspective of the follower of that religion. For example, as a Christian, if I want to understand Islam, then I need to learn it from the Muslim ulama instead of just buying books from Christian authors who talk about Islam. But those two are not enough. We need to be able to develop a competency to collaborate. So how we can collaborate with people of other faiths, find a common area where we can work together and still be different. So it doesn't mean that if we can work together, we need to combine our religion and become syncretistic, but we can actually still remain different and work together. So we also take into consideration a social psychology that basically talks about how we try to address the issue of prejudice, because the main problem we are facing is actually prejudice. So how we should design the program so that we can take into account what is called the intergroup contact theory. So we developed this concept into a program of training for teachers for kindergarten, primary and secondary schools, teachers, but not only schools, but also madrasah teachers. And in fact, we began with madrasah teachers. So for us, as our organization was actually established by national church leaders. So in order that we are able to work together and train the madrasah and Muslim teachers, we developed partnership with many institutions. So we began in 2021, and right now we have more than 20 partners. Many of them, most of them are actually Islamic institutions, like the National Mosque, Islamic State University, and other institutions. So we began the program during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So we introduced it using online, where in 5 days we introduced the concept of cross-cultural religious literacy, but we also have Christian pastors talking about Christianity, and Jewish rabbi talking about Judaism, which is very new in Indonesia, and of course Muslim scholars talking about Islam. And we began for the Muslim teachers. So that was actually a groundbreaking for many of them, because many of the teachers never had any experience of actually interacting with people of other religions and learning about their religions that are different from them. So in 2 years, we are quite surprised with the response, because more than 6,000 teachers graduated from this program. More female, actually 50% are female, graduate from the program. And then we follow that up with a workshop where we train the teachers on how to develop lesson plans so that they can teach their students. So in the workshop, they not only learn how to work together to develop lesson plans, but we also take them to visit religious worship places that are different from their faith. For example, many of the Muslim teachers, it's their first time to visit a church. And for the Christian teachers, it's the first time for them to visit a mosque. So after that, we ask them to send us video of how they teach in the classroom as a proof that they actually try to implement what they learn from the program. So I think I've passed my time, so I think that's what we try to do. And right now we are engaging the teachers in our program, and then we are also in discussion with some other countries in the ASEAN region to see how we can work together and how this can be also introduced or maybe developed in different contexts, for example, in Vietnam or in other countries. Thank you very much.
So, thank you, Matius. And I think it goes without saying that this is it's a very dynamic program. They've already trained about 5,000 teachers, and they're expanding rapidly. But you can sense also that this kind of methodology can be worked on at many other levels in interfaith circles and G20 circles, and this can be a very fruitful kind of thing. Let me turn time over now to Professor Jonathan Luckhurst.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. And indeed, thank you to Tokai University and the G20 Interfaith Forum for the opportunity to speak with you today. I do have a presentation there now. So I am talking about international or multilateral aspects of the discussion, of the topic, especially this issue of how to be involved in international cooperation, especially for the G20 Interfaith Forum to play a role in relation to the G20 in particular. So on the introduction, I think it's there. So this is basically the outline of what I'll be talking about. I'll try and keep it relatively brief so we can have time for questions and discussion afterwards. The first aspect I'm looking at is current global challenges, then world religions as engaged organizations, especially the role of world religions within global civil society, and considering what could or should be the role in the context of global governance. And thirdly, key challenges for the G20 Interfaith Forum specifically in terms of organizational strategic considerations, enhancing global governance, how to contribute towards that, and indeed augmenting its own authority and influence. First of all, on the topic of current global challenges, we are living through an extremely difficult period of time. I wouldn't like to say the most difficult time in history. It's we've had many difficult times in the past from the 1930s and 40s and the Cold War. But here we are again in a period of what Adam Tooze, the historian, has described as a polycrisis. A polycrisis, in other words, a kind of multifaceted, interconnected bunch of crises happening more or less simultaneously. The 2020s was meant to be a period of recovery from one of those crises, the COVID-19 pandemic, but unfortunately, recent events have really, at least delayed that recovery globally, especially economically speaking. So, yeah, this polycrisis involving the pandemic, the conflict in the Ukraine at the moment, conflict in the Middle East, more than one conflict, indeed. And indeed, that ongoing crisis, the climate crisis, which seems to be getting ever worse. The next aspect to consider, strategic tensions, the impact on aspects of global security, economic issues, development issues, climate issues. So this is where the G20 potentially could play an important role because it does have this very diverse agenda across all of these kind of issues and more. Issues like gender issues, taxation, even trade, etc. And then another key issue that I consider is what I call decentralizing authority in global governance. More recently, I've started to use the term contested pluralism. So this includes things like, well, especially the increased role of the Global South, the increased influence of the Global South. But in that process of growing influence from the Global South in global governance, it has brought new voices and sometimes areas of contestation and disagreement. And indeed, since the conflict in Ukraine in particular, there has been increasing talk about the possibility for a kind of fragmentation of international relations, fragmentation of global governance into different spheres even, and indeed the possibility of things like decoupling economically, moving away from interdependence, and what the G7 in recent times have been calling increasingly de-risking. But there's questions about whether de-risking implies decoupling or something else. And indeed, to bring in some comparisons, Eric Helleiner has talked about cooperative decentralization after the global financial crisis, suggesting that perhaps things shouldn't be seen as quite so pessimistically. And indeed, Amitav Acharya has talked about the idea of a multiplex world. In other words, there are different things happening. There are different groups, the BRICS, the G7, and others. Different regions, of course, ASEAN being important in Asia, European Union, Mercosur or UNASUR in South America, the African Union. So there are various things happening around the world, and that doesn't necessarily have to lead to fragmentation, according to Amitav Acharya. Moving on to the next slide. So the topic of world religions then, can they act as engaged organizations? Should they act as engaged organizations? So I think, if that is the idea, for example, with the G20 Interfaith Forum, then there are certain things to consider. Firstly, to identify the areas for faith organizations to be engaged in global governance. The SDGs seems like a relevant and important aspect of global governance, and so I think that's an area where faith organizations can play a big role. Identifying value-added benefits from contributions in particular issue areas. In other words, needs in terms of people's needs, citizens' needs, and also capabilities. What can faith organizations bring on to the agenda on different issues? And then identifying partners. So which governments, international organizations, civil society organizations and partners, private sector partnerships as well, potentially. So that's another key aspect. And then identifying the most suitable fora or venues through which to engage. So that might be the G20, but also potentially the G7, the United Nations, of course. Then you've got the Conference of Parties as part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And later on this year, there is the United Nations Summit of the Future, which might be a relevant venue to target in terms of trying to influence that agenda. Next, I want to mention key challenges for the G20 Interfaith Forum. So first of all, strategic considerations, strategic planning, thinking about goals. Is the goal to influence policy? Is it to offer practical action through the capacities of faith organizations? Is it important to find a niche? Is there an area yet perhaps unexplored or unconsidered where the Interfaith Forum can play a key role? Sometimes I think that can be important. The SDGs, again, it offers many opportunities as an agenda because there is a kind of global normative consensus, at least rhetorically. There are very few people or governments that are against the SDGs or in criticizing the SDGs. The main criticism is that we aren't achieving them fast enough or effectively enough. But yes, so there is a kind of rhetorical normative consensus. You know, we might argue about whether that consensus is put into practice, implemented. Next, the importance of enhancing engagement and outcomes in global governance. So I think that's where the Interfaith Forum could benefit by engaging and building networks, transnational networks, and perhaps influencing through dialogue. Already a previous presenter has mentioned dialogue. Yes, you know, what I call reciprocal socialization, in other words, trying to influence, but also being influenced in that process. And thirdly, augmenting authority and influence in and through G20 dialogue. Again, a book I wrote a few years ago, I focused on three aspects of authority: one, strategic; two, political; three, cognitive. And what that basically means, especially on the final part, influencing through your people's belief that you have something useful to say, something to contribute. So yeah, that I think is important as well. The more authority, the more authoritative the Interfaith Forum is, the more governments and others will take note, listen, and perhaps implement some of those goals from the Interfaith Forum. Finally, in conclusion, just to summarize very quickly then, so I think it's important to manage the challenges of this polycrisis, if indeed we should call it that, and also this aspect of contested pluralism in global governance. So if there are different voices, different perspectives, we shouldn't necessarily dismiss those automatically, even if we might disagree with some issues, but somehow need to engage. So, for example, on the issue of Ukraine, clearly the Global South, there are elements, states within the Global South that are not as supportive of, for example, G7 sanctions against the Russians. I think that's an area where there should be some kind of engagement. What are the concerns of the Global South? What are the challenges in the Global South from imposing sanctions, for example, economically? So yeah, I think to try and understand the other in that sense. Engagement via transnational networks and consensus building on particular issues. Again, trying to build consensus, which may be a slow and gradual process. I mean, usually it is. But bit by bit, gradually, perhaps the Interfaith Forum can make a difference by trying to engage with different partners and trying to build consensus on the issues that are important to the Interfaith Forum. The relevance of forum shopping, as some academics call it, in other words, considering what are the benefits of cooperating and focusing on the G20 rather than the UN or other options. And finally, on that note, I would say the G20, it seems to still be more or less functioning despite the tensions within it, which in itself is interesting. But yes, I personally do think the G20 is still a useful forum to focus on, and hopefully will continue to be so, despite the challenges at the moment. And finally, the authority effects of G20 engagement or endorsement. So yeah, that's the other, looking at it from the other perspective. If the G20 Interfaith Forum ever becomes a formal engagement group, then obviously that things might change in some ways. But at the moment, it is an informal partner, interlocutor with the G20. But that shouldn't be an obstacle to trying to influence through quiet dialogue and yes, reaching out to different states, different engagement groups, and trying to build consensus on the issues on which the forum is focused and interested, especially as we're talking about today, some of the SDGs. So, thank you very much.
So we've had the opportunity now to look at the issues of, well, thinking about social and economic development, social stability, thinking about things from in a way, three different standpoints. I take it one that is in some ways more what is a religious standpoint. Another is sort of where do you structure practical kind of inputs like CCRL, cross-cultural religious literacy, and then the perspective of someone who has really studied G20, G7, and comes at it from the standpoint of a international relations person in a way, and thinking about how do we take advantage of or use or work within this G20 context. And this is, I can tell you, one of the things that we're clearly struggling with. We're trying to learn how to reach out and connect with various G20 countries. In the early days, as we've worked in the G20 settings, we've focused on the big events toward the end, but we're increasingly conscious of the processes that are going on in each country. In India, for example, last year they had something like 250 meetings between January and September when they held their ultimate summit, and these were meetings happening all over the country with different ministries, hosting ministries from different countries, different civil society groups, different kinds of groups. So this gives you a kind of a sense of some of the flavor of the challenges of working in this area, what we're trying to do as an organization. I'd like to open things up a little bit to members of the panel, and I don't know if listening to each other has sort of or led you to think or suggest things that we should be looking at with more intensity. What are the kinds of ways we can work together? What are the kinds of programs we should look at installing? What can we learn from being in Japan as opposed to being elsewhere, and so on. So let me, I don't know, maybe I'd call first on Mr. Let's see, Asai, and then Matius, and come back. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, I'm really inspired by the other two panelists, and also, actually, we have. I myself attended the G20 Interface Forum 5 years ago when it was held in Japan, and it was a really unique event, and I learned a lot. But and also I've attended C7 or C20, CB7 or CB20 organized by the civil society groups. Particularly last year, G7 was held in Japan, so C7 was also held in Japan. So civil society groups submitted a statement and also organized a big event. But in the meantime, I felt a kind of limitation of in terms of the impact by the civil society organizations, because to be honest, the Japanese government is not necessarily open to civil society. So also other engagement groups also submitted statements or proposals, but I'm not sure what impact they had, to be honest. So I guess it would depend on each country, each government. If they are open to civil society or open to religion, then that they may take those proposals into the consideration. But I guess it would depend on each country's context. So now I wonder how we can make a bigger difference from the faith perspective, and Yeah, just have a question to Code, because you're representing Interface Forum. So what do you think is the uniqueness or strength of this Interface Forum? So that's what I'm feeling. Yeah.
The risk of asking questions is you may become the victim of them. So, but I'll think about that while Matius is speaking.
Well, thank you. I think one of the thing from Professor Jonathan Luckhurst that also caught my attention is, I think the emphasis on the getting the consensus, which is really very complex and needs a lot of persistence, patience, and understanding of the configuration. Of the G20 itself, and we are talking about how the different governments in the G20 are the dynamic between them. But then as the G20 Interfaith Forum is also what is the dynamic between the civil society organization, the different interfaith leaders, for example, between the civil society leaders and the religious leaders in that particular country with the government. Because each country in the G20 definitely will have their own agenda. But so it's not just about how the interaction between the civil society organization or the interfaith leaders from these different countries, but also how they interact with each of their own government. Because that's where I think the influence will be most relevant as well, because it's how the civil society leaders, the interfaith leaders are actually influencing each particular government, which means that each of the civil society leaders and religious leaders from different countries will also need to come up with a certain consensus between them. So I think it's that dynamic. Maybe I think Professor Luckhurst pointed out. I think it's how we understand that dynamic and how the G20 Interfaith Forum can actually manage that so that it can have an impact not only between the different interfaith leaders, but actually also on the policy of the government. Thank you.
So let me say something, and then I'll ask Jonathan to react. So with respect to the question, how can we make a bigger difference? That is something that we're asking ourselves all the time. And part of the answer, let me suggest two parts of the answer as we've thought about it, but we're open and we're learning. So, and people in the Japanese setting or in Asia more generally may have things to say that can affect us. So, point one, when we first started working on the G20 meetings 10 years ago in Australia and Turkey and some of the early countries where we did meetings, we were focused on the final meeting where the G20 leaders get together. After a year or two, you realize it's very difficult to get into the leaders' meetings. The security is so high that you can't even get into the city, let alone get close to where you can talk to them. I also went through the Trump years, and I couldn't imagine how any recommendation we could make would have any impact on him. I mean, we are alert to the strategy of having the word Trump appear several times on the one page you give him, but you know, there are limits. But the reality is, I mean, that's a little bit of a joke, but unfortunately not too much of a joke. So at one level, there's an automatic tendency to focus first on what the recommendations are and the process of getting recommendations in and how you get them to survive and so forth. I think that's important, and we need to learn how to become better at doing that. One way is we've realized we have to start much earlier, so this year we will have our major meeting about 2 or 3 months before the final Leaders Summit, so there's time to do some additional work, lobbying, and so forth. But there's another aspect of this, and that is it may be that the wrong thing is to focus on the communique that comes out itself. Because what really happens and what is more significant is you bring a lot of fairly high-level leaders together. The platform attracts fairly high-level people, high-level religious leaders, opportunities to meet with high-level government leaders and so forth. But often you're at a notch or two below the people who are going to the final summit, but you're really working with the operations people. So in some ways, it's almost better to just think about how different groups come together and sort of forge and realize some things that they agree and they can work on together. And it almost doesn't matter what ultimately goes into the ultimate communiques, because at the G20 interfaith level, we can bring religious leaders, policy people together, and religious communities have connections and influence going all the way to the ground, so that they have opportunities to motivate their members, to motivate cooperation, so that some of what happens is it's not so much the top level impact as a kind of intermediate level where a lot of the real action takes place. And getting more clear about what that is one of the important things. And one of the things we've been learning over time is we can work on that level, but we need to work on that level in different countries. So that's the reason it's January. It's not until November that the G20 meetings will happen, but we're in Japan now early, so we start learning who the people who are working on these issues in Japan are. We need to do similar things. We've got someone here from the UK who is well connected with the UK government. We've got links to Indonesia. So in some ways, you're seeing efforts to identify friends and connections so that we can learn the ropes and maybe help build new ropes. So that's part of how I see it. I think we have a lot to learn. It's been a real privilege for me to meet Professor Luckhurst, because he's been studying and thinking about these things from an academic perspective. And I think there are many things that we can learn every year. Every year, what my experience is, we've been expanding the number of people involved. We deepen connections with civil society. We expand the number of government officials we know and the know-how on how to interact with them. So it's sort of an amorphous process, but there are a lot of things that go in, and along the way you start identifying programs that look like they will really work. We're doing a lot of work now on trafficking and modern forms of slavery. We've got linked up with some very high-level people in different governments who really have some ideas of how to make a real difference in this area. Working on rainforests, we're looking forward to we've got some special meetings planned in Brazil, and of course the big rainforests are the Amazon, the Congo Basin, and Southeast Asia. So getting perspectives from different places is pretty important. But as an expert looking at what makes things tick, you talked about some of the kinds of things that would contribute to effectiveness, but really interested in your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words. I appreciate it. Yeah, and it's very interesting for me as well to be here and to learn more about the G20 Interfaith Forum. My own experience, I have written in various places on the engagement groups. I've worked with the Think 20 in particular. I'm part of an expert working group of the Global Solutions Initiative based in Germany that some people might have heard of, which kind of works with the Think 20, Think 7 as well. So, yeah, I am very interested in, and in fact, currently I'm writing a book called Network G20 Governance, which is looking at how the engagement groups and others try to influence the G20 agenda. So I've been working on the G20 a lot, that's for sure. Yeah, I mean, there are a few points to mention in response to some of those issues. I think, one thing, in terms of the how to influence the G20. I mean, one thing, the formal engagement groups, they do tend to go. They have some representation at the actual summit venue. Or at the summits, I should say, because when I was at the G20 Summit in Osaka in 2019, the International Media Center, which is where I was based, was actually within the summit venue, a huge summit venue, very impressive. But actually, you could interact with some of the delegates. They had very generously provided some excellent food, and there was a cafeteria area, and all. So you could go and have lunch or coffee, and you'd be sitting next to some of the delegates sometimes. Not the ministers or the leaders. They were in their own little zone, but at least some of the teams that were working with them. So unfortunately, this is for me, I would say, a negative. Is nowadays, in recent years, it does seem increasingly the International Media Center is somewhat distanced from the venue. In the last couple of G20 summits, people have been kept at a distance from the leaders in that respect, which it makes it more problematical if you want to actually engage directly with at least some of the delegation, not the leaders themselves. In terms of the different engagement forums, I do think there are contrasts, for example, between the Think 20 and the Civil 20, and I think that's something where the Interfaith Forum needs to consider which way works best for them, for you, and that is, if you take the Think 20, they are really, really interested in influencing, but also partly by aligning with the agenda of the G20. So they do, so they try to subtly influence the issue areas, the agenda, but to some extent by focusing on the issues that the G20 chair country that year wants to focus on. The Civil 20 tends to be more confrontational sometimes. Pushing issues that they're interested in, not necessarily purely focusing on all of the G20 agenda, the chair agenda. So that's something to consider. How do you influence? How do you best influence? Is it through compatibility with the agenda, or is it through somehow pushing issues that the G20 chair is not necessarily wanting to focus on? Yeah, probably that's enough.
So let me just, if there are questions from the audience, we've got probably 5 or 10 more minutes. Peter. The roving mic roves from my hand to.
Thank you to all speakers. Cole, just a brief comment. You sound as if Trump years are in the past. Sorry to disappoint you that this appears not to be the case. A question to Jonathan.
I try to ignore the newspapers and the polls.
A question to Jonathan. I mean, the contested pluralism is very interesting to me, and it links up to something I work on in this policy space, which I describe as religious exceptionalism. I was just wondering whether you'll be prepared to reflect on this aspect of a topic we're very interested in, both of us, which is indeed there is a contested pluralism, and it's often backed up by this religious exceptionalism, which enables specific polities which want to buy into contested pluralism to do the most outrageous things in terms of policy commitments, which appear to be legitimized and become okay as long as they're packaged as something which is religious. And I was wondering whether you'll be prepared to explore how do we face this challenge as a group ourselves, of people who believe that religious voices matter, but in the context of contested pluralism, from India to Turkey and Russia, religious voices appear to be a problem because they very often endorse the contested pluralism.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, for the question. Yeah, I mean, what's happening in Russia, for example, the patriarchy there of the church, the patriarch of the church, is very much supporting Vladimir Putin's agenda and the war in Ukraine. So which has caused some divisions, and controversy. Obviously, other religious leaders, very critical of that and questioning, how that could be a Christian approach or perspective. Yeah, I mean, the notion of contested pluralism in this sense is more kind of identifying, because before actually I was focusing on the issue of pluralism in global governance a few years ago, and then I added the word contested pluralism to the subtitle just because it seemed more appropriate, especially since 2022. So yeah, that contestation, that contestedness exists also within faith communities, faith organizations, and it's not easy. You can't easily get through that. You can't. This kind of idea that somehow through communication you can overcome divisions always. That would be nice, but it doesn't seem to happen that way. So I guess that's why I talk about the strategic aspect. Choose those with whom you can engage usefully, effectively, and hopefully through dialogue. Yes, I think there are people that are open to changing. I mean, I've changed my ideas through dialogue sometimes in my own life. So yeah, I think it's possible, but it's a question of identifying those whom you could potentially influence, and also being open to being influenced even yourself. So again, I mentioned the challenges in the global south. So putting it more in that international relations dimension, yeah, I think for the G7 countries on this particular issue, you need to, it's not just a question of saying, well, what the Russians are doing is bad, so you should condemn it and you shouldn't do business with them, but also, why are you not doing that? And trying to engage on that aspect, and I think a lot of it does come down to poverty and the difference. So for the Indians, for example, or others, if it's a question of sanctions or feeding your population, you might go with feeding your population. So these are things that in the global north, I lived in Mexico for some years, so I like to think I have a little bit of understanding of some of these challenges in the global south, and I think that's something that in the global north, perhaps the difficulties facing some of these peoples and governments is not always fully appreciated. Even if I would agree that what Russians are doing in Ukraine is a terrible thing. Yeah.
So let's see, David Burrows, I saw your hand. Go ahead. People will give you a mic.
The word literacy has been mentioned, not least by Matius, in terms of teachers, but is there a religious literacy when it comes to international cooperation and understanding, not least at a G20 level? Whilst there's an interfaith forum, maybe in some ways it's exposing the fact that there's been a gap and there's an illiteracy, whether it's T20, whether it's in C20, or is there, would you say, Jonathan, a gap in understanding? One looks at the SDGs and there's so little reference to religion when one looks at vulnerabilities. And also maybe Mr. Asai as well, whether your understanding, and in relation not least to Japan, and in terms of understanding religious literacy, how you'd seek to develop the goals that you seek to develop in a way that enables religion to get its fair share of understanding.
Let me just jump in, as I take it the question is going to the panel, but I think one of the reasons I have to say that I've been intrigued by CCRL, the cross-cultural religious literacy, is it seems to me that it has so many applications at every level. I've been heavily involved in training of government officials in different countries. They often really need to know more about things. I know in the United States there is training for foreign diplomats to try and help them to understand more about religious differences in different countries and how that works. It's not a lot of training, but frankly, some of the CCRL connections would be helpful and could be useful. So I think one of the things that we're thinking about is how we take what they've learned about and translate it into other levels of discourse. But that's my plug, and the advantage that I had the mic first, but I don't know. Let's see, you directed to all three, really, so yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, to be honest, we are struggling with religious literacy in Japan, and as you may know, there have been some scandals in terms of the religious organizations. So many of normal Japanese people are basically against religion, and it is often difficult to say that, oh, I'm practicing religion, or specific religion, and so on. That's a real situation. So what I'm feeling is that, even though, we really feel that we have a unique resource, or we have a unique value, and what that can contribute to the society. And in order to raise awareness or enhance the literacy, we feel that partnership or collaboration with secular organization would be important. Only through such partnership or collaboration, they can enhance religious literacy or better understanding about religion. So from that perspective as well, now our youth groups are now working very closely with other youth organizations to organize a big event in March, highlighting the issue of climate change and nuclear disarmament. So so I believe, if we broaden such partnership, then people's literacy will be enhanced in the future.
Well, thanks. I think one of the interesting thing for us in our doing the cross-cultural religious literacy is that with that approach is how your religious perspective is actually really taken into account in dealing with issues, in public issues. Because I think sometimes what happens is that through education, I mean the focus on STEM, science, technology, things like that are very important. But sometimes then your religious belief and perspective somehow is put outside the door. And then when you deal with the issues in climate change or human trafficking, and all of the sudden religious perspective becomes irrelevant. But for religious people and religious society, like in Indonesia, religion is very important. And religion for a religious person, I mean, it's not only about your ritual, about your relationship with the higher being or supreme being, but it can influence your whole worldview of how you view the world and the other people. So with this approach, actually, we are saying that I respect you, you are different, you have a different belief, but it doesn't mean that we have to be in competition, or doesn't mean that we have to be in conflict. But there should be certain values in your religion, my religion, where we can work together. So I think that approach, and one of the, for example, the experience that also opened my mind is that when I was invited by Cole in one in IF20 event, I think it was in Delhi, and I had my my friend who is a scholar from Indonesia, but also senior advisor at the Executive Office of the President of Indonesia, and she is a Muslim scholar, a professor at the State Islamic University in Indonesia, and she was talking about human trafficking, and then where she said that it's actually for religious people, it is quite simple. One of the application is that the ulama simply need to say that human trafficking is wrong. It's sinful, you know. So I mean, that's I think that's how sometimes how religion and religious dimension can be really taken into account. For example, in dealing with, for example, in environmental issues in Indonesia, not just religions but indigenous belief, they have certain value that teach them to protect the environment. And the people, the local people, will really respect that, maybe more than science. You know, so that's how I think what intrigued us is to see how the religious differences can actually be engaged as a social capital when we try to deal with different issues. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for the question. I think. Yeah, I mean, this is where the Interfaith Forum is trying to fill a gap in that sense. In terms of the SDGs, I mean, clearly religious organizations do play an important role in many countries in terms of even in things like providing education, providing some kind of welfare provision in some senses. You know, whether it's, you know, I don't want to name specific churches or organizations or religions, but, you know, whether it's in Latin America, different parts of Asia, in Africa, you know, in many parts of the world, in the global south in particular, you know, the religious organizations can play these kinds of roles, and of course in the global north as well. So I think there is, you know, that's why I kind of conceptualize it in terms of the capacities of faith organizations as organizations, in a sense, you know, beyond the religious dimension, but also the practical dimension that, you know, people gather at those places of worship. Those religious organizations sometimes go out into communities and are engaged and involved, and, you know, practical action. So that's where things like the SDGs, you know, different aspects of the SDGs, providing, you know, education, safe water, you know, and you know, different, you know, all of the different services involved from religious organizations potentially that can contribute to the SDGs. I think, therefore, it is relevant and important that faith organizations try to influence the G20 agenda, and that the G20 should engage with them, although, albeit at the moment on an unofficial level, let's say. Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and please join me in thanking our panel.